California is truly at a breaking point.
Valero's got gas stations all across the country, but it's this refinery that is particularly important to California.
Refineries are closing, supply is diminishing.
Environmentalists are cheering the shutdown because of the decline of pollution, but the question is, where is California going to get its gas?
This is not going to be a smooth transition. Every time you lose a refinery, it's going to be a double-digit % of refined fuel lost in California.
My constituents are paying more at the pump every single day. And it isn't theoretical. This is happening right now.
Refineries keep shutting down. Phillips 66 in LA to Valero in Benicia, facilities producing 20% of California gasoline, the latest, with only 7 major refineries left in the state, experts say.
And the longer we wait to address this issue, the more instability and volatility we'll see here in California.
They say decades of state policies targeting oil and gas have created a cost and supply crisis with serious consequences, and it's going to get worse without swift action. While the national average for gas right now is well below $3, in California it's $4.52, up 14 cents in the last week and up 30 cents in the last month. They say it's going to get worse.
That was one of the most honest opinions I've heard from the administration ever. This is not a smooth transition. You cannot collapse one energy system before the next one is built. You cannot punish working families into a transition.
It doesn't just affect California. Arizona and Nevada also get their gasoline from our state. So you've seen their governors, bipartisan, expressing serious concerns over the crippling of the energy infrastructure in our state.
So this is a letter that was written from one of the few remaining oil refinery companies in California, PBF Energy. And they are basically saying, we're bleeding out so much money already that unless you change the way that we as domestic refiners in California are impacted financially, how much it costs us to refine in the fine state of California, unless you change that up relative to those who are importing fuel to California, because zero of the restrictions that in-state refineries are experiencing, none of those are applied to companies bringing in imports to California. So you've got this wildly disparate playing field, and the few refineries that are left, there's like 7 left. They're basically saying, unless this changes up, we can't make any money. We got to go. That's what we're talking about today. We're gonna take a look through this letter. Let's get into it. Here we go. We're also going to look at article on this that's been written. Writing on behalf of PBF Energy to provide comments in the California Air Resources Board, that's CARB, Cap and Investment, C&I program. So, and this is that letter, who we are. PBF subsidiaries own and operate 6 domestic oil refineries, including 2 in California, Torrance and Martinez. Our refineries, together with our logistics assets, are critical to California's fuel supply chain and the broader California economy. Gasoline got 33% of California's in-state production, 23% of total California demand, including 30% of the Bay Area and 20% of Southern California demand. Jet fuel, 50% for Sacramento International and Oakland airports, 40% for San Francisco and San Jose, 30% for the Los Angeles airport. This is a massive, massive company to California's oil supply. Massive. Marine fuel. Jobs in local economy, 1,000 jobs. California crude oil. We purchase and refine the highest percentage of California crude, supporting thousands of production jobs, especially in the Central Valley. Tax revenue, billion in state tax revenues annually from the fuels and other products our subsidiaries manufacture. This is a letter that went out February 25th, okay? So that's kind of who it is. Now, what I'm going to skip over to is an analysis by Katie Grimes, and we've seen a ton of stuff from her. She's California Globe, and she's really honed in on this, kind of like I have from the YouTube, but she does the, that's not good. There we go. How about that? Let's reformat it a little bit there. Energy company you may or may not have heard of, PBF. I had not heard of them, but then again, I've only heard of a few major ones anyway, which has a huge impact on fuels in California. Just sent a letter to California Air Resources Board, CARB. Why? To provide comments on the California Air Resources Board's CARB's cap and investment program, including the proposed amendments. This is what you've got. There are proposed amendments to the California cap on greenhouse emissions and market-based compliance mechanisms regulation. This is a regulation on California's oil industry, right? Think of it that way. These proposed amendments are draft amendments to Assembly Bill 1207. PBF Energy is warning about the stark reality, the impacts the current CARB cap and investment program would have because of the state's remaining 7 refineries. And okay, so I'm going to skip back to, this is the gist of what they're saying. You've got this basically a table of expenses. And here's your historical expenses, okay? They're just kind of annual cost to PBF. And it's somewhere between 50, 77, 67 in that range. Current program forecast bumps up in 26 to 87 million a year. Then we go 101. Then we go 116, 133, 151. And then they're proposed program forecast in 2031, 176, 229, 253, and these are in the hundreds of millions of dollars, ending at 308 million in 2035, which is less than 9 years from now. So if you're PBF and you're having to explain to your shareholders, and shareholder stands up, just like, to Gordon Gekko in Wall Street, stands up and says, all right, let me get this straight. We're already losing money as a company in California, and it's going to get way, way worse. Our expenses used to be 50 million a year, and you're saying that's going to go to 300 million plus, and we're already losing money? Why would we do that? And the answer is, yeah, that's exactly what we're talking about. And that's why the company is basically, one of the big questions is, why did they send this letter instead of just pulling out? Right? I mean, and so much of this is just politics. All right, let's go the soft way. Let's throw out a letter and we'll say, hey guys, no can do. We can't make a go of it here. So we're going to further shut down, 2 of the refineries. 2 out of 40 or 44 or whatever California used to have back in the 80s. 2. So that's a 5% reduction. Now you take 2 out of 7. Yeah. Massive impact on constricting the supply. And then there's one place for price to go. And I'll give you a hint. It's not down. It is not down. It's not down. So PBF Energy is warning about the stark reality, the impacts the current CARB investment program would have because of the state's 7 remaining refineries. And CARB's proposed amendments will only worsen the current state of the program, making costs skyrocket further. And we saw the table. If enacted as written, the proposed amendments will inevitably drive in-state refining capacity to, get this, 0. It's like in Seattle, the knuckleheads, socialist knuckleheads, not understanding that the minimum wage can also go to 0. Like, oh, but no, the minimum wage is $27 for pouring coffee into customers' cups and then writing the name on the cup and spelling their name wrong and handing it to them and expecting a 45% tip because, life skills otherwise don't dictate that they should be making any more money than about $10 an hour. But because we're in a socialist city like Seattle, that's what we're going to do. But the idea is, well, they're getting $28 an hour, minimum wage. It's great. That can go to 0, just like the refineries can go to 0. We're done. We're out. Boop, gone, right? Whoa, why? Why is the author, Katie asking, inevitably drive in-state refining capacity to 0? Why is the CARB really trying to force, and is the CARB really trying to force all in-state refineries to close. If businesses can't stay afloat, then they close. Is that the game plan? It certainly seems like it. It certainly feels like it, right? And this coming as Gavin Newsom is, he's on his book tour about his childhood. And he's telling black people that, because he's got a lower SAT score, like 960, and, he's had bad credit, that he's just like them, as he simultaneously purchases a $9.2 million home in California. Just like you. Just like you. Yeah. If you had millions of dollars and were white and were privileged and had spent most of your career wrecking California, just like you. Since 2020, when gasoline supply was relatively balanced, 5 in-state refineries either shut down permanently or completely curtailed gasoline production. So this is coming on the heels of years and years and years of refineries, oil companies saying, we can't do it anymore. We're done. We can't make money here. And yet you've got Gavin Newsom and you had Biden saying, it's all this profit taking that is creating a situation where we're trying to push back on that. California legislators, leadership, trying to push back on profit taking. And you've got refineries leaving. If they were making so much money, they wouldn't be leaving, would they? No. Yeah, but you don't point that out to California leadership because, head blown, right? What are we doing here? So we went through the who PBF Energy is. California cannot afford to lose PBF based on these important stats. They're a huge supplier of jet fuel, gasoline, diesel, you name it, right? And so you take this out of a ever tumbling house of cards. It's like, there goes the third floor. We're down to 3. Okay, we got 1 left, but we got 1 solid floor left. Foundation's crumbling. This isn't going to go well. Down she blows. PBF Energy Incorporated warns the status quo of the C&I program, that's the cap and invest program, will severely undermine the viability of in-state refining. Undermine the viability of in-state refining with potentially devastating consequences for California's fuel supply, economy, and workers. They're basically coming right out and saying, hey, you're not leaving us much of a choice. Closed. Proposed amendments will make the situation exponentially worse by increasing in-state refiners with stationary payments, meaning it's going to cost us more money. We're already bleeding out. We're not going to do that. We're not absolute dum-dums. You know what I mean? You can only expect business to stay in the pocket if they're making some kind of money, or if there's something that they've been promised in the future that's going to make their scenario of making money better. But when all you've got out in front of you is just a downward scale of profit, no business is going to take that. You know what they're going to do? Closed. We're done. We're done. Gone. Metal Leo, right? Before finalizing the proposed rule, we urge CARB to address the state's gasoline supply-demand imbalance by revising the current C&I payment schedule and proposed amendments to put in-state refiners on equal regulatory footing with, now this is super important, fuel importers. So all California has done is they've said, it's going to be fine because we're going to bring in all the fuel you need. We're going to import it. And some of that nonsense is they're importing it from the Bahamas. It's going from the Gulf Coast. It's going from Texas. It's going from Houston to the Bahamas, switched up on a ship, coming back through the Panama Canal, around the West Coast, all the way up to California. Does that make any sense whatsoever? No. I don't know if you've seen the ships that these come in on. Even the ones that the Johnson Act says, yep, 2 thumbs up, they're good. These are not electric ships. Let's just put it that way. These are billowing emissions into the air, as you do when you are transporting millions of gallons of refined fuel or crude or whatever it is. These ships basically run on sludge, right? Some may be a little bit more efficient than others, but it's sludge. And so it's this crazy dichotomy of, instead of doing that total F about going from Texas to the Bahamas, Panama Canal to California, I mean, just work that through in your mind. How does that make any sense at all instead of just drill, baby, drill in California? It doesn't. It's absolutely, yeah, it's mentally challenged. We used to say the R word in the old days, and I don't mean Republican. Yeah, right? But status quo of the C&I program severely undermined. They say that due to the latest refinery shutdowns, Phillips 66 and Valero, we've covered those extensively. Gasoline imports are estimated to have grown to 250,000 barrels per day, a 500% increase, because now all the oil that you used to be bringing out of the ground in California, domestic production, is all being imported. And a bunch of it's being imported from the Bahamas, from the United States. Just wild stuff. 30% of the gasoline supply that is produced in the state is now imported, primarily from refineries in Asia. How do you think that's going to go with a little Iranian war, right? And now you've got these other countries, Iran's, poking the bear with some of these other countries, and you've got the Strait of Hormuz, where 20% of the world's oil gets shipped through, a channel, but then Iran's got to keep that open because they've got to export oil to China. Whole thing is just, it's wildly integrated. And then you've got insurers who typically issue war insurance policies to people who ship oil, basically saying, we got a war going on, guys. We're not going to write any more policy, or we're going to cancel policies, right? I mean, it's crazy. It's like an insurance company. Well, we got a big tornado coming. We're not insuring for tornado. It's not looking good. We're going to cancel those policies. This isn't going to go well. We got to cover our backside. Policy, yep, denied. Right? As a war actually comes out, it's standard insurance stuff, right? If the state fails to address inequities between in-state refiners and importers, refinery closures will accelerate more than they already have been, and the feasibility of the state's fuel supply will come into question. I have concerns about the acceleration and feasibility of the state's fuel supply. I have concerns. I have great concerns. I have great concerns about gasoline spiking to $12 a gallon. If you can get it. That's the big if, right? I raised this question to Mike Ariza, and I said, $12 a gallon. I said something like this. Was on last Friday. I said, $12 a gallon doesn't seem that far off. And his response was, that's if you can get it. And I'm like, yeah. So that whole concept then, next step then is, if you can't get it, social unrest. Wild stuff. And I'm not talking social unrest like I experienced as a child in the early 70s when we had one of these bad boys where we lined up with gas cans, like just hoping to get a little extra gallon of gas, like Road Warrior. But there was some people that were upset. People were like, going head to head. Hey, you cut in line. I remember people cutting in line. That was a big deal. And as you're a kid in the back seat, you're like, are we going to make it, Dad? Are we going to get our gas today? That was like, what's going on in our world where there's a problem with gasoline? Why do we have this problem? Well, there were people getting gas that day, guaranteed. You go a few days without gasoline at all, you're going to have some real social unrest. And guess what? There's going to be concerns. There's going to be concerns about the feasibility of the state's fuel supply. So, CARB claims that the Cap and Invest program complements other measures to ensure that California is effectively meets its goals for greenhouse gas emissions reductions. You know, you got to get this whole goals for greenhouse gas emissions reductions and toss that, because this is basically just a regressive tax on those in California that can afford it the least, the lower socioeconomic folks, because everybody's got to have gas for their car, because those who can afford it the least ain't driving a, Elon Musk Tesla X or Y. They're not doing that. They're driving a gas car. So you are effectively taxing those who can least afford it the most. Nice job, California. You're number one in poverty. Well done. Oh, I have concerns about, not so fast, says PBF Energy. Existing cap and invest regulations and proposed amendments will effectively drive in-state refiners out of business while importers are completely shielded from these costs. So what California is saying, hey, consumer, everything's going to be fine because we got you covered. We've got gas coming to you. Well, I mean, you have to backfill it from the Bahamas, but we got you covered. Now, what happens if something happens at the docks where the ships come in? What happens if something happens with the shipping lanes, like is happening with the ships in Iran right now? What if that happens? Yeah. Oh, what if you can't import what you need to? Oh, we have concerns. If in-state refining becomes significantly impaired or infeasible, catastrophe will go into well beyond gas supply for consumers by also affecting military bases. We've talked about that in length, leaving West Coast, Best Coast wildly exposed. Just, you hate to say it, but backside up, head down, you're going to take a thumping. Jet fuel for California's airports, marine fuel for ports, plus crude oil production in the Central Valley, all of which would impact thousands of direct and indirect jobs throughout the state. I'm worried about jobs, but I'm more worried about just, wild unrest because there's no gasoline to go around. And guess what that would do for prices in my area? I'm in Washington State. I drove past a couple of gas stations this morning. Gas was $4.89 a gallon, and this is regular unleaded. And then also $4.85. That was the cheap version. That was I think Shell. You know what I mean? You're like, good Lord, it's almost $5 a gallon. Guaranteed this week, those go north of $5. I'll report it right here. Despite claims the state is in mid-transition to EVs, electric vehicles, more than 90% of registered vehicles, off-road construction, and agricultural equipment, trains, boats, and planes rely on liquid fuels, not electricity. We have absolutely jumped the gun. And by we, I mean California. And that affects everybody. Because so much stuff is made in California. And gasoline, oil constitutes 8% of California's GDP, right? But it makes the other 92% go because if you don't have any oil, gas products, you got nothing. You got nothing because it goes in everything. Given this continuing demand, curtailing in-state production will jeopardize fuel availability and affordability by driving up costs for every California motorist, business, and government entity. That didn't sound promising. That doesn't sound like, hey, let's go down this road. This will be great. Greatest thing ever, right? No. They continue with the outrageous costs involved. Cap and investment program is just one compliance burden. Myriad regulatory agencies impose significant costs on California refineries. The competing importers never pay. They don't pay because it's, if we bring it in from the outside, that doesn't go against our carbon footprint. Oh, genius. Oh, just fantastic. But then, you're literally pulling out that revolver and shooting yourself in the foot because the most effective way of bolstering your fuel sources is to pump it from the ground in the state you're in. And California has the 4th or 5th largest oil reserves in the United States. So drill, baby, drill. Oh, no, we can't do that. We have to virtue signal how green we are. We're not going down that road. Oh, hell no. Let the refineries close. I don't have any concern because we're just going to import it. Well, yeah, you might want to rethink that there, Junior. To comply with state and federal regulations and ensure safe, reliable, responsible operations, we invest significant capital in our 2 in-state refineries and logistics assets. Now, all of these things are in that other letter, but this is broken down in a format that's a little bit better by Katie Grimes. $100 million to $300 million each year is what they spend on capital investments and modernizing and redoing and making sure the damn thing doesn't blow up, right? $100 million to $300 million each year. They're bleeding out money. They're looking forward going, hey, based on your proposed amendments, you're going to cost us even more. So now we go negative, to negative, to negative, We're out. At some point in time, they're just going to be, we're done. We're gone. We can't do it here. No can do. Homie, don't play that game, right? Remember Homie the Clown or whatever his name was? With most of the work done by California building and construction trades crafts during turnarounds. That is, I believe, union, correct? But $100 million to $300 million each year on each of these refineries. Or on our 2 in-state refineries. Governor Gavin Newsom and the California legislature could immediately end the state's fuels crisis. They have the authority. But instead of impose such high costs and business-killing regulations on the state's refineries and oil producers, we're down to 7 refineries. Kind of reminds me of, when we had 302,000 criminal illegals swarming across the southern border into our country, bringing fentanyl and human trafficking and all kinds of crazy stuff. And then the Democrats and Republicans got together and said, well, we just need some legislation to make this better. And legislation was terrible. It just basically elevated the number of criminal illegals that could come into the country illegally daily. And that got voted down. And then, you had new leadership, and then border crossings were reduced by like 95% in the first year. And now it's down to damn near 0. You've got the legislation in front of you to make this work. You could make some tweaks. You could make some changes. You could still virtue signal about your climate goals and still keep the refineries open. Put them on an even playing field. But you know what? Leadership in California doesn't give a damn about that. All they concern themselves with is, Gavin Newsom's literally out on a speaking tour about his childhood and how he has dyslexia and a low credit score. And he's just like you and me and black people. It's like this. You're doing what? You're saying what? About what? I don't even think that I don't think Democratic Party's going to run him. I think he's a liability. I think he has so many, what in real estate, what we term buyer objections, that they can't run him. They're going to run Kamala Harris and AOC. It's the dream team. Can't wait. Can't wait. Can't wait. It's as if California's elected lawmakers and governor are trying to destroy California from within because every significant policy area in the state is crumbling. We got water. We got infrastructure, roads, bridges, freeways. We got public safety. We got education. We got ports. We got rail, transit, levees. We got energy, agriculture, housing. But hey, go ahead and vote for Gavin Newsom because, that's going to work out well. Another couple more refineries closed down by PBF. They've given all the explanation they need to as to why they shouldn't keep them open. What's California going to do to make them feel comfortable? I don't see in any way, shape, or form how these refineries continue to stay and do business from a business standpoint. And since these are publicly traded companies for the most part, why wouldn't they close down? Because they got to explain to ownership. They got to explain to their equity holders, stock owners. Hey, how come we're losing so much in California? Well, yeah, we just talked about it. Did an entire podcast. And we've done tons of other podcasts as well. Now, will this happen? the real question would be, why wouldn't this happen? I mean, if a real estate guy can figure this out, broad strokes, I have concerns. I don't think it's far-fetched to see another couple of refineries saying, no, we're done. We're closed. We are closed for business. No mas, right? No mas. Can't take it. No mas. And they can't. Can't take the bleeding. That's what we're doing. All right. And I will podcast it for you, podcast after podcast, right here on News for Reasonable People. Make sure you're subscribed, hit that notification bell. I'll see you in the next episode. Thanks for joining. Bye for now.